2026, we will see much greater proliferation of AI-driven products and services. In my experience,
This is Ray Eitel-Porter. He's an award-winning author for the book Governing the Machines.
We need to think about how to use the new tool, stay in control and get the best out of it.
I'm not worried about you. I'm not worried about me. I am worried about, I hate to say it, but
Governments have difficulty of making changes in the structure of taxation and redistribution.
which is where you've got the big tech getting the majority of the cream.
But they're not being regulated in a way that everybody benefits. You need global alignment.
Does a localized model look more achievable?
That ship has more or less sailed, and the only credible contenders now are
Ray, nice to meet you.
very nice to meet you too.
Yes, I know, on a bloody miserable day.
It certainly is.
A traditional
Wet and damp.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, look, let's try and bring it to life in here. May the sun shine in here.
Wonderful.
No better place to really start, I guess, than Governing Machines. Governing the Machines. What a great, great book title.
Well, we were trying to find something that was a bit more engaging and exciting. And, we started off with a title that was much more prosaic. And then you think, nobody's going to pick that up. It really doesn't grab you. And so the idea was to have that first headline title of Governing the Machine, which is a bit sort of, what's all this about? And then the subtitle, which tells you more about kind of what's in the book, understanding AI risk and helping you to exploit its potential. That combination, I think, works quite well.
You've landed in what is a seriously hot spot, but you got there a lot earlier than most, I think.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I started working in the space of kind of responsible use of AI and AI risk and so on, probably 8 years ago or so. Right. And that came from, I'd been involved with what was called analytics, and then it became big data, and then it became data science, and then it became AI. I've been involved in that for much longer, but we started to see the first sort of risk flags going up, and it was really around bias appearing, right, and around privacy and misuse of people's personal data. And those were the two kind of early signals of, wow, this amazing technology is fantastic, but actually there are some things we need to be careful about. And throughout my whole career, I've always been a techno-optimist. I've always loved new gadgets and new technology and the way that it can have amazing, positive impact on the work that you do and the services and products you can offer and so on. And I just thought, well, these risks are going to be an issue. If we can't deal with the risks, then that's going to be holding back the way that people use the technology. And I gradually started to get more and more involved in that space, very much from the point of view of we need to conquer these things so that we can get the benefit out of these new technologies.
Right, great. So you've got the optimistic lens. So what you're really saying there is your motivation is that you actually want to unleash its capability.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. I think that AI has amazing potential. Even if I just look at, the way that I use it in the daily work that I do, it's fun and it can be incredibly empowering. And so I want to give people the confidence that they can use it in a way that won't have nasty unintended consequences. Because most people don't want to do something wrong or for the AI to go wrong. Admittedly, there are some, bad actors, let's say, who might have other ideas, but the vast majority of organizations and individuals want to do the right thing. And so it's about helping them to find ways to make sure that happens.
Those early signals around bias and privacy and accessing personal data, they've grown, I guess, from the early signals to what is now a more explosive market. Yeah, where have they come? Well, we know where they've come from, but where are they now at from your perspective?
So I think there's two things that have happened. One is that the number of different risks has expanded. the risks that we need to be aware of. And the second thing which ties into that is that the types of AI that we have also expanded. So when I started looking at this, we only had what I call traditional AI. So this is machine learning, it's data science, it's basically taking patterns from historical information and making inferences about a future pattern or about the correlations and the causality between the different items. And then we introduced generative AI. That's what people tend to see these days. That's ChatGPT, Claude, Llama, these different models that do something very different. They still use historical data and they still look for patterns within historical data, but they actually create something new. So previously, you were effectively extrapolating directly from what happened in the past, but you weren't creating any new content, no new words, no new images, no new sound, etc. But with generative AI, as its name suggests, it generates new content. But that in itself introduces a whole bunch of new risks which weren't there with traditional AI.
Right.
And then the new frontier, as it were, is agentic or AI agents, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in the future because that opens up then more new risk areas as well. More power, more potential as we move forwards, but also more things to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the application of the intelligence.
Yep, exactly. It's how is it going to be able to how are we going to be able to use that for good purposes?
The part of your book, which is, I guess, one of the early parts of it, is when it really you're putting the responsibility, you're trying to shift. It feels like the responsibility of AI from the tech team to the boardroom.
Yep, I think that's fair. I think it's very fair. Interestingly enough, when these risks that we talked about, the bias, the privacy, etc., when these first started to surface, it was mainly people in the tech team who were surfacing those risks.
Yes.
They were, engaged in their day-to-day work and they were seeing these things, and some of them were saying, not too comfortable about some of these things that we're seeing or that are happening.
Right.
And it was only later, partly due to pressure from the frontline data scientists, pushing it up the organization, as it were, and saying, hey, we need some guidance on how my organization thinks we should deal with some of these things. I give you one example, bias and fairness. So there are very often, when you create these models, there are very often trade-offs between accuracy and bias. And so the more you de-bias a particular algorithm, often the accuracy goes down. So somebody has to make a decision, and it's almost impossible to remove all bias. So there's always going to be some bias left in there. And the question is, well, how much bias is okay, right? And the frontline data scientist who's building the model doesn't really want to make that decision on behalf of the company. That should be a much more senior decision that is made, or at least guidelines that are given. You may not be able to have senior leaders make every single individual decision, but give me some guidelines, give me some, direction as to how I'm going to answer that question when I'm doing my daily work. And that's why I think it is critical that senior leaders understand enough about the issues to be able to give guidance and put in place the safeguards across the organization.
We're seeing quite a lot of change on boards, aren't we? I've noticed that I've spoken to people which are saying that they're having to make shifts to adapt to this. Do you think that's required?
I do. The one obvious thing that we're seeing is a lot more chief AI officers or a chief data officer came along first, and then the chief data officer is now often called a chief data and AI officer if they're combined.
Yep.
You have a few boards that actually have a sort of chief responsible AI officer, but In more cases, that role is taken on by whoever's the chief data and AI officer. But it's undoubtedly true that I'd probably say most boards now have that kind of role on them. Whereas if you go back 10 years, certainly 15 years, most boards didn't have that kind of technical capability. They would have had a CIO, but a CIO was very often focused on the sort of technical plumbing, if you like,
Right.
Which is really important. But he or she wouldn't have necessarily been an analytics, data science kind of expert.
Yeah.
And I think that the recognition from boards that data analysis, call it AI, whatever, it's all sort of the same thing, is really driving a lot of business decisions and products and services these days, has elevated that role to being a critical board role.
Someone's got to carry the can if it goes wrong.
Yes, yeah. And someone's also got to help the rest of the board understand what the potential is.
Yes.
Right? You know, you need to understand the technologies to be able to say, hey, we could do this with it. You know, this could really transform our product or our service or whatever it is that we do, because they see the potential.
When you talk to leaders about this, do you think that they're spending more time thinking about the risks or the opportunity?
That's a good question. I think they're probably balanced. Let me try and explain what I mean by that. I think that they're very much thinking about the opportunity, and I think that comes from the fact that things like ChatGPT and equivalent services have made it much more apparent to the consumer what is possible. Previously, pre-ChatGPT, when I would go and talk to senior business leaders about the opportunities for using data science, analytics, whatever, I had to do a lot of convincing. You had to really try to explain to them how this could be powerful, how it could help in their business. Once they got the consumer version of a ChatGPT in their hands and started playing with it, then immediately they were thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. Right? I can do all kinds of interesting stuff. Yeah. Maybe we could use this in the business, you know. And so that really sparked the imagination, I think, of senior business leaders. You also had the fact then that lots of people started saying, oh, we need to have this. And then, of course, there's the fear of missing out. And if we don't do it, the competition will, and so on. So that's driving senior leaders to be thinking about the positive opportunities. But of course, they also started to see headlines of it going wrong. You know, courtroom cases where a lawyer had used it and it had produced, you know, false cases. Yeah. All kind, you know, customer service agents saying stuff they certainly shouldn't be saying, and so on. And so that immediately makes you think, oh, hang on a second. Yes, this is great, but we need to be careful in how we use it. And so I would say that actually senior leaders are coming with kind of both things in the same breath. Yes, I want it. I can see its potential, but I'm also very nervous about it.
Now, I'm guessing it's not necessarily that the customer service agent said something slightly wrong that's your biggest concern.
No, probably not. Probably not. I mean, I guess it is an obvious concern, right? Yes. Because it could be something really quite, you know, upsetting and egregious.
Yes.
And it could be a chatbot that's being used in a situation that relates to health. Let's say, not a customer service agent as such, but let's say it's giving health advice. And maybe it's giving regulated or maybe it's giving unregulated health advice. Right. That concerns me more.
Yes.
You know, people turning to these tools and asking questions where it hasn't had any kind of clinical training or regulatory oversight or so on. And yes, it's often very good, but it's not always very good. And you know, sometimes it could be giving very misleading and potentially harmful answers. I'm extremely nervous and worried about the way that people are becoming attached to these agents as friends or romantic partners or whatever. And, we've seen some tragic cases of suicides encouraged essentially by the AI. That sort of thing, I think, absolutely needs very urgent intervention.
Yeah. Eric Schmidt, Google's ex-CEO, billionaire, seems to know what he's doing. He, I think it was only 4 or 5 months ago, came out and he said something like, your AI will be your best friend, your chief of staff, and personal advisor, and much more.
Yep.
And it's hard to see that is almost not inevitable, right? That looks like right now in terms of our current trajectory. And so if you consider the access that it has to us and its ability to influence, that is extreme, really, isn't it?
It is. I would say I'm very comfortable with it being my chief of staff, my personal assistant, etc., but I don't want it to be my best friend. I can see absolutely how it, has the potential of being that for many people, partly because it just knows you so well, because it knows, our digital footprint is pretty much everything these days. And so if it has access to all of that, it can really understand you incredibly well, and therefore it has the ability, to become a best friend, because it can absolutely play to every nuance in terms of what you like and don't like and so on. And these tools are programmed essentially to please, right? So if I think of my best friends, they're not programmed to please. They're good friends, but they'll give me, contrary advice, or they'll say, hey, Ray, what do you think you're doing with that, or what have you? And that's, to me, also the mark of a good friend. So I hope that they don't actually become our best friends, but certainly personal assistant, etc. I think that's fantastic and would be incredibly useful.
I know that's what you prefer, so I totally respect that. And I think that's not necessarily a bad lens to look at it through. But I got to go with Eric Schmidt thinking it is going to become people's best friend. Like that's the reality of the scenario, isn't it? You got something which is incredibly supportive, can listen to you 24/7, offer you incredible value, whether right or wrong, but perceived value.
Yep, totally.
Okay, I'm a lazy human being that likes my quickest route to most stuff.
Yep.
Intelligence is just going to be the latest. Unfortunately, it ain't going to be. I was going to say fad. Not going to be a fad. I
don't think so.
So I just can't see any reason why it doesn't become the best friend to your average 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old.
I agree, but I still think that is concerning.
Yes.
And I think that would change our world significantly.
Yep.
I don't know if you know the book, The Anxious Generation.
I don't know, no.
So I finished that not long ago, and it basically talks about the impact that social media has had on a generation that have grown up, with it. And there's a lot of really good data-driven analysis in there. And it's Jonathan Haidt, I think is the name. And he's a professor. He's done lots of research into the area. And he says, children need to be out falling out of trees, and they need to be learning how to, form their own soccer teams and argue about who's going to be in the team and playing on the playground, and somebody fouls and how they're going to sort it out, because these are all human skills that they need to figure out to prepare them for later in life. When they retreat into an online world, they don't have to deal with many of those things. Some things become actually much more acute because if certain people attack or ostracize or what have you, that spirals and can become really bad in the online world. But then other things, they don't get the same kind of immediate feedback and human interaction experience and learning that they would from doing it in real life. And I worry that if we all turn to having, our best friend as our AI, that will significantly change our social interactions and kind of who we are. So I don't disagree with you that it may well happen, but I think it will have a big impact on people and on our social world.
Yeah, if I sat 50 teenagers up here right now, right, from today's generation, and then went back to your generation, and lined 50 people up, and you said, right, guys, line up. You all got a post-it note. We're back in your management consulting days here, right? Got a post-it note. Write this down, put it on your forehead. And we go, write down the most valuable asset you've got, right? And I just imagine that back in our day, we would have, I don't know, a football, a bike, right? And then down this other line, what would you have? You'd have
their iPhone, their phone.
Yeah.
I think almost unanimously.
Unanimously, right? And so their value system is built on digital value.
Mm-hmm.
The highest form of value for them is digital. And so it's an interesting point your book raises. If I had to prepare my son, I've got a 6-year-old son, who's mega, by the way, great, love him. If I had to prepare him for the physical world or the digital world, right? I've got a choice.
Either or. Okay.
Or, right? 6 years old. That would be a very, very tough decision. Because you'd immediately start, I would be like, well, definitely the outside world. It's got to be able to handle himself and interactions and have confidence, all these sorts of things. And then have you seen Adolescence?
I've seen a little bit of it, yes. Yeah.
Incredible. Like just the way that pulls the cover back on how the digital environment world is leveraged. Him being unprepared for that.
I agree with you. If I had to make the choice, I would prepare for the digital world because that will be a very significant part of his life growing up, and doing well in and surviving in that environment is going to be absolutely critical.
Yeah. So interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Which, as you said, wouldn't have even been on the radar, before. No, you'd have been there. And I had a computer, but if that was your main asset back in our day, you'd have been the kind of slightly weird kid. Yeah, exactly.
We've all got one of those, but that's got nowhere near
exactly.
my ball, or my cricket bat, or I don't know, my books, physical, stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And what we can learn about that, right, is that if you look at early stage technology, it's normally the Wild West. Do you know what I mean? It really is the Wild West, isn't it?
Yep.
If you look at email marketing, at some point there were people sending billions of emails out.
Yes, exactly.
And then we moved to crypto.
Yep.
Look at the first, look at the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years of that. I mean, there's more scams gone in crypto.
Yeah, totally.
Than there has in, probably all industries combined, I would imagine, in a short period of time. And so, it's interesting when you think about the vulnerabilities maybe of AI. History tells us, doesn't it, we're at our most vulnerable at the early stages of technology.
Yes, and the other challenge is that technologies in general have tended to accelerate, and AI is no exception. In fact, quite the opposite. I mean, the speed with which AI has become more powerful is quite incredible if you compare it to previous generations of technological advances. So I guess where I'm going with that is we have much less time to prepare mentally or with laws or guidelines or whatever, because our legal and regulatory system isn't set up to respond that quickly, and humans actually don't change the way that they do things that quickly either.
Yeah. And even if you look at social media, that exploded, but the evolution of it, for it to get to where it is today with short form 10-second videos, actually it's been on a very early journey, hasn't it? It evolved to probably 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, where people started taking a photograph of their food and showing them neighbours what they ate last night.
Yep.
Right. But prior to that, it started in a place which was, let's connect with our friends and chat and stay in contact, and then it moved to sharing a few photos. But it's been a long journey, like you say. Whereas this, the kind of stuff which we might see annually or every couple of years in terms of progression, you're kind of seeing that in a space of a month or 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the capability of these AI models is accelerating dramatically.
Yes. And I watched a clip earlier today, actually, of Elon talking about the fact that the reason that him and Meta, Zuckerberg and the rest of them are piling into these data centers is because, and this is a really interesting topic, I keep bringing it up whoever I talk to, which is that we're nowhere near reaching any form of, like, basically the opportunity to expand capabilities exponential. And that's why they see the reason they're investing in this. And what's really interesting about that, the thing I keep bringing up, is that the IBM CEO that came out and said, hold on a second, we've invested 8 trillion. Did you see this?
No, I didn't see this.
And so we've invested 8 trillion. That means that we need to somehow generate 800 billion a year to service the debt that's been invested into it. I worked the maths back, 400, I think it's the big 5 tech firms have generated 400 billion of profit a year. So the big firms could only service, with all of their profit, half the debt that's gone into it.
Right.
And so I actually worked out, and I went all the way through numbers. The only parallel I could draw was that we spend globally something like 10 trillion a year on electricity.
Okay.
So if we were to assume a 20% net margin, as a couple of trillion, that would have the ability to service
the debt that's been incurred. Yeah.
That's been invested. So we're looking at a market that has to have scope of electricity.
Yeah. Which I don't think is unreasonable. I mean, I think, AI is generally seen as a general purpose technology, the likes of electricity. What will be interesting is that studies suggest that it took electricity about 50 years before it started to have its full impact. I mean, obviously you saw it, when it was invented, you saw it popping up in different areas. But things like factories, to actually, rework a factory to run off of electricity took many decades, because it was a big physical reorganization of the factory. You went from having lots of individual generators and workstations, etc., to having centralized electricity coming in that could power a very different approach to manufacturing.
Yeah.
But it feels like AI will have a much faster impact on work and how organizations function.
Yes. Yeah. And so getting back to those risks, we were talking about the impact on health. We've spoken there about this, I guess, the invasiveness, the access and influence it can have as a best friend. Where are the other big buckets of risk that have grabbed your attention most?
The one that is top of mind for most people is hallucinations or confabulations, or whatever you like to call it. Essentially, AI just making stuff up.
Yeah.
Right. This doesn't happen with traditional AI, which is extrapolating from a pattern of numbers. It doesn't make up new things, whereas generative AI can invent the law case that never existed, or whatever it happens to be. Now that's good in the sense that if you want it to create an image, clearly it needs to create a new image that didn't exist before.
Yep.
If you want it to create some poetry or something like this, it needs to be creative so that it can be very positive. And while some artists, etc., are not very happy about AI, there are others that say actually it's very good for creative stimulation. And if you use it the right way, you can bounce off of AI and it can actually help a writer or an artist or whatever to create really interesting new material. But the fact that it makes things up, which are probabilistic in terms of how it creates them, means that it will get stuff wrong. And if you're a business and you're deploying AI in a business context, having something that from time to time goes wrong, it's not great.
Yeah.
We're not used to that. We're used to deterministic products or services where we know if you do this, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And we know what the result is going to be of a computer program or something, something like that. And that's still, I think, the biggest single challenge that companies are grappling with. And that's holding back the deployment of AI undoubtedly because of caution. And there is no way that we have no technical way at the moment of going into generative AI and stopping this from happening. So the only thing that you can do is to layer additional controls on top. We can put ring fences around, we can put guardrails in place and so on to look out for things that, don't look right and to double check things and so on. But of course, you can't double check everything and look for everything. So some things will still slip through.
That hallucination rate is reducing.
It is reducing, yes.
Yeah. Is it reducing at a rate, do you think, which will see us get to a place where this is less, becomes so marginal that it's not really an issue?
I mean, that's clearly what everyone's aiming for.
Yes.
Will we get to that point? I think it depends a lot on the context, and it depends also on what you measure against. So let's take a health situation where, the context of a wrong piece of medical advice could be a life and death, decision. The consequence is really high. What percentage of, risk are you going to accept in that? But we also have to think about, humans make mistakes too, right? So at what point do you say, well, actually, it's as accurate as most doctors?
Yeah.
And that's not 100%, but it's good enough. Let's take self-driving cars. Right? I think it's generally accepted that there would be less accidents on the road if you had self-driving cars now, because they're typically safer than people in most situations. But we hold them to a much higher standard.
Yes.
And an accident from a self-driving car is headline news. An accident from a human driver isn't. Yeah. Sadly, unless certain circumstances. But
does that mean that there's a pragmatism that's required around this regulatory guardrails approach? I
think that's exactly it. Yes, I think that's exactly it. And I think that corporate leadership, organizational leadership, has to get used to the idea of a different sort of risk assessment to what they had in the past.
Right.
They have to get used to living with a higher degree of risk, basically, and being really thoughtful about making those trade-offs transparently and carefully, but still being willing to take a decision that says, yes, I am actually willing to take a bit more risk.
Yeah.
And I think the insurance market will have a role to play here as well, because that ultimately is part of the role of insurance, right? To cover against that extreme adverse event that may or may not crop up, but you can pool that risk.
The accountability of that risk shifts in lots of cases. So if I think about the car one as an example, the manufacturer.
Or who's accountable? Yes, exactly. Is it the car manufacturer? Is it whoever developed the AI software? Is it still the driver? And actually working out that liability regime is critical for acceptance of self-driving cars. Yeah.
Yeah, because the I agree here sign off box on a car going wrong is not going to suffice, is it?
No.
That's going to wear thin pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so that is interesting, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily the rate of, it's not the fact that this is more accurate than a human or safer than a human. It's the fact that maybe it might, let's say that it's 80% safer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 20%, only 20% of the number of accidents that happen with from a human happen with a self-drive car.
Yes.
The issue is that 20%, if it sits with the car manufacturer, might be way more than the accountability they currently take.
Yes, because they probably don't take any
Very
account
rarely,
or very, very little accountability at the moment. It all goes back to the driver. So you're right. So how are we going to? I never thought about it quite like that. But how are we going to? Who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
Actually, because the car manufacturer, in a strange way, doesn't have anything to benefit from fewer accidents. Society does.
Yeah.
Hospitals do, families do, etc. So it's not really fair that the car manufacturer should be bearing that 20% cost in your example.
Yeah, so when you talk about their risk profile, it's materially not only just a kind of stats thing, is it? It's actually, and the other point is that there's a philosophical issue there, which is does
Yes.
Ford now want to take that 20% it
Yep.
never used to take?
Exactly.
Or whatever that is, 1 or 2%.
Yes.
They don't want to be, like you said, it only needs to be, we killed one driver last month.
Yeah.
It was a better month.
Yeah.
That, and so it's a really, there's a fine line, isn't there, in terms of where organisers sit on that. I'm fascinated by the self-driving car thing. I remember sitting in a room in 2015 with a team of people, got a big team of automotive recruiters that are servicing different businesses. And I just come back into this particular business and we take the decision, like, well, we need to become more specialised. Tell me about what you're doing. Right, we're going to get into to autonomous driving.
Right.
And so we started building out. In fact, we built out Samsung launched a autonomous driving ADAS and LiDAR radar kind of function in Munich to start off with, and they assigned us to build the whole, all of the resourcing for that.
Fantastic.
But we've heavily been in that space and understood the technology and the journey that they're on.
Right.
And there's two things to consider there. The first one is the gap has always been significant, right? To get to a place where
Yes.
they can see the end goal, but getting there is kind of a
It's
long
been
way.
much harder and longer than people expected.
Yeah, and it's similar to the humanoid space. I don't know if the humanoids on a video on YouTube looks fantastic. We've had Aaron and his G1 in here from Unitree, and it is incredible, but it ain't autonomous.
No,
and it isn't. It's a million miles from it. It's it might be able to do stuff limited in a factory. So, what they can present and what they can actually deliver, there's a big gap. So there was always this gap, but you could see it narrowing down. But the biggest challenge was this kind of ethical, moral, building a technology which they couldn't really see how it was. It's just a labyrinth to get it to be deployed.
Yes.
And so when you talk about risk with AI, we see that in self-driving cars. I guess the other point here is that there's huge supply chain in these big organizations. There's huge supply chains which were involved,
Yes.
whether that's a technical or a physical supply chain.
Yeah.
Accountability, responsibility is at the top, number one priority of all of those large organizations, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess there with the supply chain, you raise another point in that there will be multiple people probably involved in developing a particular system.
Yes.
Right? So accountability within that group of people is going to be very important.
Yeah. Those risks have branched out to now into agentic.
Yes.
And so where are you sat with this?
With agentic.
Yeah.
So,
agentic?
I mean, maybe just to clarify what agentic is, and the difference with agentic is that it takes generative AI and traditional AI, but it has the power of agency, as in it can take actions. So if I go on to a chatbot like a ChatGPT at the moment and I say, can you recommend a hotel in Paris? I've got a business trip coming up, whatever, and here's sort of what I like, and here's where the office is I'm going to be working in. It'll come back and it'll make some recommendations. Great. With agentic, it would have the power then to go and actually make the bookings. You could say, here's what I'm looking for. Just go book me a hotel for that night. And, you have my credit card details and away you go. Now, obviously, that's going to come in steps and stages. So first step would be you don't just give it immediate authority to use the credit card. Come back and tell me what you're recommending, spending my money on, and then I'll say yes or no and so on. But in principle, it can do lots of things. And agents can have tools so they can use other programs on the internet. They can go and do research, and they can, look for things, and they can execute on your behalf. The challenge here is simply that the consequences of mistakes become bigger, because if a ChatGPT gives you a wrong piece of advice, you at least look at it before you take the action to go and do something. Whereas if you have trusted the agent to go off and do something and it goes wrong, well, it's actually done it. It's happened. So then you have to unravel it. There are at the moment still legal questions about actually, what legal authority does an agent have on your behalf to execute transactions and things like that. But a little bit like the questions of liability and accidents, that will all have to get sorted,
Yes.
sorted out. But the other problem is that agents, as many of these systems are what we call multi-agent systems. So actually the best way to build them is you have particular agents that specialize in different activities. So you don't just have one agent that is, to the point you raised earlier, your personal assistant, your factotum that does everything. That may come, but at the moment it's actually better to have agents that do individual steps, and then you link them together to carry out something bigger. The problem is that each individual agent has a probability of going wrong. And once you string them all together, the probability of one of them making a mistake that then causes the whole house of cards to collapse, goes up significantly. So that's one of the other challenges with agents. But on the other hand, you can immediately see how useful this could be, right? I mean, for an agent to be able to actually, do things. I built one over the holiday period to look at incoming email newsletters that I get. I subscribe to a whole bunch of different email newsletters broadly on AI and tech and so on. And it was getting to the point where my inbox was overwhelmed with all these newsletters. So I built an agent that would, on a daily basis, look at the newsletters, read through them, deduplicate, and find the one that was giving me the best sort of analysis on a particular topic, because often there's overlap, across the different newsletters when something new breaks. And then I gave it a set of criteria and said, well, if it meets these criteria, then I want a 200-word sort of summary plus a link to the original source. If I want to go and dig deeper, I can. And if it's any other news, then I just want a 1-sentence summary so that I can see it and think, oh, actually, yeah, that one would be worth a look.
Yep.
Now that's, incredibly helpful. And it's actually taking those actions, it's actually going, it's reading, it's summarizing, it's putting them together into a summary sheet for me and then coming back with it. It's limited risk, obviously, because, if it does it wrong, well, all it means is that I've missed a piece of news or, something
Yes, absolutely.
isn't quite right. So in that sense, it's still limited risk, but you can kind of extrapolate from that and see how it could be so powerful.
And that moves us into those agents that you're talking about, the next layer of that, and what we're experiencing and what I'm working on as well, 2026 is autonomy.
Yep.
So the orchestration and execution. So do you want to talk to us about that?
A big question will be how much autonomy, right, do we want these agents to have? And we will need to build systems of guardrails. So one component of that will be having a very clear set of policies or rules that the agent is supposed to follow.
Right.
I say supposed to follow because I noticed in building my own agents, they don't always do what they're told, right? So that's number one problem. But let's assume, first of all, that you can get it to always follow. You give it a list of rules. So never spend more than £50 without coming back and asking me, for example. You can codify a bunch of things that it should or should not do. You can specify the tools that it's allowed to use. So you can constrain its ability, and you can make sure it only uses tools which you vetted, you're comfortable with, are okay. You can control the access that it has to different information and documents. So, for example, for my new email newsletter, I don't actually want it going into my main inbox. So I forward all the email newsletters to a separate inbox. It only has permission to go into that inbox.
Right.
So I can constrain, its access. There are these kinds of approaches that we can take to build this sort of governance, this sort of safety framework around what agents do. You can also use agents quite effectively to check other agents, right? So that's another way. You have multiple ones checking, cross-checking, and so on. That can be quite, pretty effective.
What we're talking about here really is that the systems of the future require as much governance as they do innovation and creativity.
Yes.
When you're surveying the world right now, where would you say we are today in terms of at the most progressed level, something that we can consistently use? How advanced is the tech from a business perspective? So you've outlined there the steps we're at. Where would you say we are as where businesses can reliably operate at today?
I think the key words that you've used there are reliably and consistency, right? So there are sparks of genius, if you like, in things that the AI can do, which are quite amazing. Let's take, protein folding discoveries and things, some amazing things.
Incredible, yeah.
Absolutely incredible. But I think for most businesses, what they can get AI to completely reliably do at the moment is relatively constrained still. But I think that is changing rapidly. We're getting better, as you said, the hallucination rates are going down, both because of the way that the foundation models themselves are being trained and developed, and also because of the additional controls and frameworks that are being put around them by organizations. So I think over 2026, we will see much greater proliferation of AI-driven products and services coming through from organizations which are good enough, as in, they may not be 100%, but they meet a standard that we are comfortable with.
Today, what we're seeing is a lot of AI startups, right, which are very specialist, and they're putting in specialist scaffolding to manage and govern the outputs. So those types of services, I guess we're probably getting to a place where we can reliably access individual services from startup businesses like that.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely the right way forwards. There's lots of evidence that custom developed applications, let's say, where you use the core inherent capability of a foundation model. So if you think about an OpenAI or whatever, and I only keep mentioning that name, but it's there are others out there as well. If you use the core foundational capability, what is that foundational capability? It's essentially the ability to read and understand, not in the same way as humans understand, but it understands in inverted commas, and it can write, or it can create images and so on. So it's a little bit like, and we have to be very careful with anthropomorphizing, but it's a little bit like a child, learning to speak and to understand and see things around it and interpret them and try to figure out, what's going on. And then what you do is you give it some specialist training for a particular end. Again, think of an example I always use is when I was at school, we did comprehension tests where you were given a passage from a book or something or other, and you had to read the passage and you had to answer questions about the passage. You used your inherent ability to read and to understand and interpret the text. You were not allowed to use knowledge from beyond the text to answer the questions. You had to find your answers within that text. And that's a little bit like what we do with training these specialist AIs. We give them particular databases, let's say, of facts, of curated information, and we say, draw on that information for giving your answer, because that is a medical database, or that is a legal database, or whatever it is. It's got financial regulations in it or something. And the narrower you make the task at the moment, the more accurate typically your AI can be. It also makes it easier to spot mistakes and to put checks and balances in place because you've got a constrained universe that you're trying to check for. Whereas if your AI is capable of doing anything, that's very hard to check for.
How big a threat do you think these startups are to traditional businesses?
I mean, they can be a serious threat. I guess the challenge typically is route to market, is channel, right? For any, whether it's AI or for anything else, in my experience, that's often the hardest part about launching a new business. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. It'll be interesting to get, your views on that. But I think that that's often the hardest thing to crack. And so for a new startup that comes in with a specialist product, it's how am I going to get it to the customers? That's going to be tough. And incumbents, have that inherent advantage.
Yes.
But that's obviously why many of those startups will look to partner with people who are already in the business, and they bring something new, and maybe the two combined is the solution.
I'm just kind of summarizing where you stand on that. So you think it's not necessarily an imminent risk, but it's on their radars, or
definitely. I mean, I think if businesses don't adopt these kinds of AI approaches, then it will be an existential risk.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I sat down with a guy. In fact, a couple of people over the last 4 or 5 weeks have called me and gone, Ezra, we're thinking about moving our CRM. We want to move our CRM from this platform to another platform. And we just wanted to get your views on it. Their worry is we need to move. Mm-hmm. The platform we're moving to is better than what we've got. But we feel like this is going to be gazump soon.
Yes.
Right. And I can't help but say to them, I think you're right. Okay. And what that means is that I can't help but think that when it comes route to market right now, the moment that there is an AI lawyer that is hundredth of the price, that delivers, that rumor mill will start very rapidly. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
You know what I mean? Like that. And so, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about access to traditional services potentially at an significant increased rate. And I think the difference to the consumer is that I think that they're, like that conversation had, they're looking for the groundbreaking solution. I think actually they're wary right now of this one's, even though it's a significant step forward. Is it significant enough?
Yes. I think that's fair. I still think there'll be some, slowness in the system of adoption, but I do think it's a very significant risk for businesses, and I totally think businesses need to move with it. I think the same is true for people. If you imagine today somebody in the workforce who said, well, I don't use PCs, I don't use computers, they would really struggle, right, to get many, many jobs. There are probably a few jobs that don't need to use a PC, but many jobs do. And the same will be true for AI. If you're not willing and able to use an AI assistant, to help you in what you do, that's going to be a major problem. And I think people need to be open-minded and, get training, get playing around with it, and get using the technology so they're one of the people who are there and benefiting from it.
Yeah. I've had 2 conversations with 2 of my mates. They're both property developers, both incredibly successful, right? Really successful guys. And when you meet them, one of them is, he's a bit of a geezer and he's very much, right? But he's very, 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 very smart very savvy, very well read, all these types of things. But he's a property developer, and he's an entrepreneur, and he's he's a strong character. And there's another guy as well who's a property developer, again, never really operated in the digital world, never done anything. I sit down with them within a week of each other, haven't seen him for a couple of months. One is enrolled on an agent course.
Interesting.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah. The other just completed a course on how to create content to kind of stand out and build basically content-driven businesses.
Right.
And as independently of the other chap, has lined himself up for another course on AI. And so it's interesting you say that, right? Because it's that proactivity, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, one of those guys is 58. The other guy is probably 45. And that literacy, and I just thought it was, I just looked at them and like, they're two winners. They're really both real winners, both self-made,
Yeah.
And
but they've spotted that this is going to be really important,
Yeah.
and that they need to get on top of it.
they've got to take action.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
taken action.
I think that's fantastic. I think
Yes.
that's fantastic. And as you were hinting at, I think, they're not necessarily the obvious candidates that you would have thought
Yeah.
would have done that.
Absolutely, yeah. Often the digital world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, don't need to do it.
Because they're successful and they've got good businesses.
Some done for the rest of
yes.
their lives, those guys, but they're in there.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting you talk about that, because I also have this other thing, which is that I say to people, do you know what? If you pick a niche topic, okay, a really niche topic, and you spent an hour every night and an afternoon every weekend and studied that topic for a year, it put yourself in the top 0.0001% of people in the world at it.
Yeah.
Right. And that sounds odd, but it's like you can become that
a real expert.
And it's accessible, isn't it? It's accessible to everyone. And we advertise different roles. I advertise this for a CTO. Okay. 1,200 applicants.
Wow.
That was a well-written advert, and we're an attractive proposition. But
still,
1,200 applicants, right? And I've interviewed a few of those guys, and I've sat there going, you've got a credible background, and they're all doing fractional work, but they want to secure a full-time gig,
right?
You know what I mean? Like that's not the option that they want,
right?
And I do wonder if I look at that across other disciplines, and that's the CTO. We're in a tech boom, right?
Yes, yes,
wow.
Exactly. Yes.
You look at other areas, like you say, and there's you've spoken about the change at the board level, and the leadership level.
Yep.
There's an imminent threat, I think, to junior middle management. There always is with significant change like this, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
You've been through that management consulting thing, and
yeah.
With big technological transformational change here, there's normally that several layers that get hammering, isn't there?
Yeah. And that's happening at the moment, or starting to happen. Yep. There was a story in the paper about McKinsey yesterday or day before yesterday, and apparently now they have started experimenting in their interviews for candidates. They're actually testing them on how they use AI to solve business problems, because they see that as being an inherent tool that they will have to be good at going forwards. And I think that's the beginning. Others will go in that direction as well. You'll be expected to be good at using an AI assistant in what you do. And inevitably, I think it is going to reduce a number of jobs, because it's going to make people massively more efficient. And as the productivity goes up, well, is there so much more work to go around? Yeah. So at some point, that becomes an issue. Maybe you're not laying off, but you may not be hiring as much, because you don't need to, because you can increase your productivity dramatically with the workforce that you have at the moment.
How worried are you about that?
I think that's going to come. I do think that's going to come. I don't personally subscribe to this view that, well, in the past, new technologies have always in the long run created more jobs and so on. I think this one is different because of its impact on cognitive tasks. Previously, new technologies have basically taken away manual tasks, and we've kind of moved up the food chain as humans and doing more and more sophisticated things, but cognitive things. And now the AI is taking those away. I'm just not convinced there's enough work to go around when you shrink it down. But I think we can adapt to that. I mean, when I was a kid, it was not uncommon for people to work 6 days a week. And then we went to a 5-day week, and then we shrank, the hours. Now, not everybody does that. There's still a lot of people who work a lot more than that. Yeah. But I don't see why we can't have a society where people work 4 days a week. And wouldn't it be better if we share the work around and, find a way, which we're not necessarily that good at doing, but, trying to find a way for actually people, the same number of people to continue working, but they just don't work as much, rather than having a bunch of people who work and then a large bunch of people who don't work.
Yes. Yeah, there's going to need to be a kind of reorganization of manpower of the workforce, isn't there? The redistribution of how we kind of think about how people are spending their time, what they're contributing to, how many hours they're working, when they're working.
I think so. Yes, I think so. And I think that's something that, some companies are actively thinking about that. There are a number of companies that are experimenting with 4-day weeks, and they claim to be, they claim that it's working.
Yeah.
But you also kind of think that that's a societal change that government needs to get involved with at the scale of the problem that we're going to see.
Yeah. Do you know Chris Summerfield of he's leading?
No, I don't.
Ex-Google DeepMind, and he is the director of AI research for regulation in the government.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And I always say the same thing when I talk about Chris. So I spent an hour and a half with him, and you realise that there's a good person, with a strong moral compass.
Fantastic.
Who's pragmatic, but also very, very, very smart. He's been in Google DeepMind. I think he's the 4th employee.
So that's perfect.
Yes,
in that role. That's really good. That's encouraging.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
really encouraging.
Thank you.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah, and the issue is that he can only operate at the speed the machine will let him.
Yes.
And so sitting down with Ben Warner, who is the ex-chief digital advisor to Boris Johnson.
Yep.
Yeah, he's helped me understand just how difficult it is. And actually there are 2 parts to what Ben shared, right? The first part was that that there are so many great people in the government trying to do the right thing. But the second part was just how difficult it was to get them done.
It's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And that's a challenge, right? Especially when things are moving fast.
Yes. Do you think there's more that we can be doing? When I say we, I mean you and I, right? I mean anybody that's got thoughts and feelings, doing more to inspire change from a regulatory perspective. You're obviously leading that, right? You're doing as much as you can, I guess. But I mean, the average Joe public, me, right? Can we be doing more, do you think, to raise awareness of this?
Yes. I mean, so first of all, to answer the question about myself, I mean, that's why I, do get involved and sit on the, AI ethics and governance board for the local government and social care ombudsman as an example, and other things, because I think it is really important. I do think generally, though, we need to raise the level of literacy and awareness of what AI is capable of, what's good about it, and where the risks are, etc. And I think if that's something that more people could get involved with helping in that process, because I think if the general awareness and understanding of the public goes up, we'll get a better debate about it. We'll get more support and more trust for the use of AI in, let's say, public services and so on. I had an example today in a conversation with a government-related organization where, someone was saying one of the challenges is that within the system, approval is required from a lot of different stakeholders. And because of the risks and liabilities, if there are certain stakeholders who just don't understand the topic particularly well, they typically just say no. And once you've got a few people blocking, then the whole thing falls apart, it stops. And that's clearly disappointing. So the more we can raise the understanding level of people generally, then I think that would be a very good thing.
Yes.
And might enable government to move faster with introducing changes.
Working in this industry, on a daily basis, I'm working and seeing the autonomous capabilities that we're building. That I feel that there's a sense of inevitability about it. There's no doubt, but there's also a sense of responsibility to raise awareness from it. And when I sat down with Callum, who you know, Callum Chase,
Yes.
we talk a lot about this economic singularity. I've just seen Musk say the same thing. We're in the singularity. We've reached a point where it's inevitable. There's no holding it back. The bit that worries me is the journey. It's not the destination, actually.
Yes.
Oddly, a lot of people worry about the destination as well. Will the machines rule us and that kind of stuff? People say I'm stupid when I say I think we'll figure that out, right? But the journey I'm worried about. I see, like you just said, the loss of jobs faster than the regeneration of new ones.
Exactly. And that could cause massive social problems.
Yeah.
Right. Also, the fact that it may well hit particular sectors very hard. I mean, if you think about the impact on mining communities when mines closed and there were no jobs for the people locally, that was hugely problematic. But let's suppose that self-driving trucks came in and suddenly we don't need any truck drivers anymore. Yeah. That's a whole swathe of people who are suddenly, without jobs. The risk is that AI will come and take certain jobs like that.
Yes, the breadth of the impact, isn't it? It could deal with one vertical at a time over a 10-year period.
Yes, but it could take many more than that.
Yes.
Yeah. Though, I mean, the only thing to be fair is that a lot of people say that AI in most cases won't take an entire job. It will take a large chunk of a job. And then the question is, well, how does the organization reorganize to account for that? I mean, let's suppose it takes 50% of Fred's job. Well, what do you do with Fred? And actually, the thoughtful organizations are the ones that are really sitting down and planning this out. And they're sitting down with Fred and reassuring Fred and saying, okay, you should be using AI to do a lot of your work. That should free up 50% of your time. Now let's think about what you're going to do with that 50% so that there isn't a fear that Fred's going to be out of a job.
Yep.
And they're actively helping Fred to figure out what the next thing is and how he or she can go on and do more interesting work or different work or what have you. It potentially means that if that happens across many people, well, we don't need to hire new people for a while because we've suddenly freed up this huge amount of capacity. That I think is a problem.
Yes. But look, you're worried about this not because it's standing still. I was talking to Dave Wood the other day who said that at the point in time we had a Nokia phone, okay, and then we had a PDA, right, which was personal organizer, all your notes and all of your addresses and everything, okay. But it was unfathomable that we were going to have a smartphone.
Yes.
The experts said it will never happen. And you're like looking at it going, right. And I can't help but think that we're exactly the same space. Okay. The only difference is right now that we also have this insane inertia and acceleration and velocity of innovation. So if you didn't think, with this here, this was moving so slowly comparatively.
Yes.
Right. I just cannot believe that I will not be getting legal advice from an AI lawyer, financial advice from an AI accountant. It goes on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Within, I think 2026. Okay. But let's double that, into.
Yeah. Even if it's in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. 3 or 4 years. Do you think you'll pay 300 quid an hour or 400 quid an hour to an AI lawyer in 2 years' time for standard legal advice? What do you reckon?
I think it depends on the topic, right? For standard legal advice,
yes.
No, I think I'd go and get AI help. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If it's some really complicated thing, then maybe you still go to the, you go to the lawyer. But that's a moving target, isn't it? That's going to, the capability of the AI lawyer is going to improve over time.
You look at the Bank of America, I think it's got their AI bot, Erica. Just completed 1 billion transactions. Okay. Now, again, if we look at those if we look at the correlation of the data, just the basics, I'm a very simple guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we look at the correlation, right, which is it's gone from 0 to 1 billion transactions.
Yep.
Right? Number one. Number two is that customer satisfaction as a metric has increased in customer service for the Bank of America.
Right.
Significantly, a 30 or 40% increase.
Right.
So it's gone from 9% to 15% or something. I can't remember what it was. So you go, hold on a second. Not only is it dealing with a volume,
Yep.
people like it.
Exactly. It's getting more happy customers. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And your agentic world, what that really, just in real simple terms, says, in my eyes, it can have more agency. It's going to do more. So if we look at that Bank of America bot, it's going to start to fulfill more tasks and services as time goes on for Bank of America's customers, right?
Yes. I mean, so to be concrete, you could easily imagine you ask it about what kind of account should I open? And then you say, okay, well, I take your advice, go do it. Right? Go and open the account for me. And it obviously has to ask you for some information.
Yes.
It's fair enough. But it then runs that whole process. Whereas currently you might get some advice from it, and then you've got to go find the place on the website where you can open a new account and all the thing. And it would just do it and come back to you for, oh, well, I need your passport number, or I need, whatever it is. I need your proof of address and stuff. And fine, but it gets on and does it. Yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah. Do you find that your levels of tolerance for traditional admin are decreasing because of your expectations of technology?
Yes, I think that's true. I think that is true, definitely, because you know how it could be done better.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what's also happening is that I'm getting pissed off with companies that aren't operating with at the benchmarks which are being set in parallel industries.
Yes.
It's just our consumer expectation, behavior, desires. We're all being engineered into this lane, aren't we? It's just ease and accessibility.
I think that's absolutely true. And as companies, the companies that adopt the technology in a way that consumers are really happy with are then going to really profit in terms of picking up the new customers.
Yes, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head there for me, which is that erodes loyalty very quickly.
Yep.
So my loyalty to a traditional bank compared to Bank of America, if they've got this wonderful gadget, whereas that erodes rapidly, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it's not just an AI phenomenon. I mean, one example that comes to mind for me is Octopus in the energy sector, right? The way that they have managed to really establish themselves as being, top in customer service, great for prices, and I switched to Octopus. Their systems are so easy to use. Their website, the app, or whatever, piece of cake. It's just really pleasurable as a customer. It certainly wasn't with the people I was with before.
No, there you go. It's happening. It's happening. And I guess that leads back into that piece that we were talking about getting route to market. And where that ties all back in is to actually, is the route to market really going to determine the success of these, or is it really just customer experience and the incumbent's ability to keep up with them?
That's a good point, actually. Yes, that's a very good point. I mean, I guess Octopus have done a lot of advertising, but they have found the route to market by advertising direct to the consumer and just hammering away at that message that, we have the best customer satisfaction ratings, etc. And then word of mouth, obviously, at some point starts to kick in because your neighbour's got it or whatever. And they say, oh, it's really good,
Yeah, it matters. It really matters. And it's going to matter. I think the reason for it, because it's just going to matter. It's so much more with this rate of the speed, the rate at which people have changed. Right?
Yes.
Because I've got some great lawyers. I love them to pieces. I have a really good relationship for 20 odd years, and there will be work that I need them to do in corporate transactions and all different stuff. But the moment I've got something which is 100% dependable, provide me with all daily legal advice, on employment law and all of the little contracts and basic stuff that can be swept up. I'm taking it.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, Terry.
Yeah.
But it's just a fact. And so with that, coming back to your, if we see this kind of massive transition in our economy, right? You've spoken about some of the risks today. That's today, right? I'm really interested in the future, as you know. I spoke to you about it. We spoke about this on the phone, and I almost immediately pour into the risks and the impacts of, I think it just comes around so quickly. Where do you sit from a risk perspective? So when you project forwards, what things do you worry about most there? And when you paint a picture of the future and the rate at which we're traveling,
I do have concerns about our ability to control AI at some point in the future. But if we leave that one aside, my main focus area for work, etc., has been on the more, let's say, day-to-day application of AI. What I worry about in that space is actually people becoming over-reliant and losing our cognitive skills. So I'll give you, a couple of examples. So there was an MIT study that was done, I think it was in 2024, actually. It was an early study, but others have followed up and come to similar conclusions. And they looked at three different groups. They split their sample into three different groups of people. Some of them had no tech assistance to answer some questions. Some of them had traditional Google before it had Gemini. And some of them had ChatGPT. And then they used a brain scanner to measure the degree of cognitive involvement. And basically, as soon as you started to introduce tech, people's cognitive engagement and the way they were using their mind dropped off. And those who had ChatGPT had the least cognitive engagement. So you can see there a pattern of people becoming over-reliant and just sort of giving it to the AI and not really thinking about it.
Yes.
And that plays into what we call automation bias, which is a challenge that people tend, not all, but some people tend to overtrust AI, and they will assume that the AI's answer is correct. And that can be very dangerous if you don't check properly, and we kind of abdicate our accountability and our involvement in the process of the decision making. So that's one thing that I worry about.
Yeah.
And the challenge there as well is that as AI gets better and better, there will be a greater temptation to rely on it and, less reason for you to engage and just, let the AI do it. Yeah. So I think that's one thing we need to figure out is to how, we keep cognitively engaged. And then I think I mentioned to you before we started that there's this short story written by E.M. Foster in 1909 called The Machine Stops. And it's quite astonishing. We were talking about science fiction, but, he describes a society which is basically run by AI. Doesn't call it AI, yes, but you would recognize it today as this society where AI does everything. Everything runs by the machine. And one day the machine stops. And the problem is that nobody has a clue how to do anything because they've relied on the machine to, bring them their food and to make the entire society work. And they don't know how to fix the machine and they don't know how to do anything else either.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like sat-nav. If you switch sat-nav off today.
How many people know how to actually get out a map and drive from A to B?
Well, how many people
My
get
children
to work?
Certainly don't. Yeah, exactly.
Be so funny, wouldn't it? We'd love to know that. If we switched all jet sat-nav off today, tomorrow morning, they wake up, how many people would not be able to get to work?
No, it's a very good question. Yes. Yeah,
that's really interesting. The cognitive ability thing is really interesting, isn't it? Because all other tech has been tools. They've been tools we use. Mm-hmm. I think about this now as effectively it's becoming a higher power. people are deferring to it. And I worry about the same thing, which is they're deferring to it. And it's a bit like ChatGPT or Gemini or these models, okay? They have both the ability to be a Big Mac, right? Whilst also being the finest organic food you've ever had, right?
Yep.
They can make you super healthy, incredibly intelligent, or massively obese very quickly. And it's weird because I agree with you that it's like this leaning into the ease of making decisions, this higher power aspect. If you're not using it as a tool, if you're not in control.
Exactly. And we don't have any training in how to do that, right? And that's what we have to learn. And I think that requires a very different approach to how we work and how we do things in our, private lives as well. I mean, I don't know. Is it a bigger change than when we started to use personal computers? I don't know. I mean, that was a pretty dramatic change. If I think back to, typing into a word processor versus writing a letter, that was pretty monumental change. And then figuring out how you're going to print it out and your letters suddenly this nicely typed thing.
But it was a transformation of an existing skill, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes.
You didn't have to stop thinking there. You had to start thinking.
You had to start thinking about how to use the new tool, to your point.
It,
Exactly. But maybe here as well, we need to think about how to use the new tool.
Yeah.
But we also have to think about how we're going to stay in control and understand it and get the best out of it.
I'm not worried about you. I'm not worried about me. I'm not worried about my two mates who are property developers. What I am worried about is, and I hate to say it, but it's those people which defer to the easiest route.
Yep.
And that's a huge swathe of the public. Right? It's a huge, huge swathe of the public. And understandably, standably in many respects, a lot of people haven't got the time. They're worried about paying their bills at the end of the month. I haven't got time to think, Ezra, you want me to go on the journey to learn? Oh, you don't want me to have the answer. You want me to learn from going on the journey. Well, whilst I'm learning going on the journey, I'm not, flipping enough burgers or doing enough Amazon runs or whatever it is to put food on the table for my kids.
Exactly.
So so there's this. The irony of it is the fact that the more I think about it, and I've spoken quite a lot on this topic, but I think actually what it does is it probably makes the less fortunate even lesser equipped.
I think that's definitely true. I think that is a big risk. I think that's a big risk that the benefits will not be equally distributed.
Do you think we're effectively going to see another obesity boom, but just much faster?
Do you mean physical obesity, or are you using that metaphorically?
Metaphorically.
Yes, we could do, actually. We could do. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we will see a divergence in terms of people's ability to use it. And, there's been a general trend anyway towards, better off people getting more better off, and the divide widening in society. And I think this will inevitably exacerbate that. Yes.
That's so sad, isn't it?
It is. And it should be the opposite, because actually this should be providing capability and abundance, if you like, to everybody. And how we make sure that this technology is used for general good, I think is a critical thing. And it's got to come back to governments, I think.
Yeah. The key here, though, is that I guess those of us that do have agency in this new world, able to influence and affect it, are we better off just trying to get to the end game as quickly as possible? Because do you think about this kind of universal? They're talking about universal high income now, right? But so I was talking about this earlier, which we were saying that. So big tech generates all of these autonomous technological services. It reduces jobs, right? And so what happens is they generate significant amount of revenue. governments tax that revenue, redistribute it to the citizens, who then spend it, choose which big tech services to spend it back on. And that becomes a loop, doesn't it? Which actually, in many respects, yes, there are going to be a series of people whose pockets are lined. I actually think, weirdly, the more successful those 5 or 6 big tech companies are, if they can run the world in some respects, it's going to be easier to regulate because there's only 5 or 6 of them.
Yes.
Right. Well, it might be easier than regulating 1,000 or 10,000, right? And the second point is it's quite clear where the obvious source of income's going to need to come from.
Yeah.
To, and it's almost like they become the revenue generating, for many. Is the journey to getting there just going to be a painful one, or getting close to that place? Is it just going to be decline for a knot of people, do you think?
I guess my concern would be about the process of getting there. Do governments have the ability? We talked earlier about, the difficulty of making changes. What you just described are massive changes in the structure of taxation and redistribution and all sorts of things. I'm not convinced it's going to be very easy to get to that point. And so therefore, I guess to your observation, the journey to get there is likely to be difficult. Yeah. Because, I don't think it's going to be easy to get there.
The problem with that is that we end up in a halfway house.
Yes, we could do.
Which is where you've got the big tech getting the majority of the cream.
But they're not being regulated in a way that redistributes and everybody benefits. Yeah.
They end up relocating to Amsterdam or into, wherever it might be.
Yes.
To, avoid those taxes. Yeah. And that's the issue, isn't it? It's like the halfway house can be really painful.
Yeah. You raise another interesting point there, and that is, you need global alignment actually to make this work, because otherwise they just disappear off to, wherever isn't aligned.
Yes.
And that in today's world is not easy.
Although the way it's polarizing right now, does a localized model look more achievable? Actually, when you think about it, so actually, do you say, look, I'm sorry, does it become more localized? The only way to control it is that the British government say, look, if you're in the UK, you're only able to use these services because these services are part of our wider economy. Like you access our NHS and you access our tax system and you have to pay and do certain things. Part of this is that, you have to go through a British electricity provider.
Yep.
Do you have
the challenge is that I don't see how we can actually create our own models of this scale. I think that ship has more or less sailed, and the only credible contenders now are the US and China.
Do they license those and do those deals? So we've seen, haven't we? It's quite. We have seen, for example, in Australia, cut Facebook off. Was it Facebook?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Kind of interesting to see things like that happen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
If what you think is impossible, they do manage to actually take extensive action at times. I mean, I always find it incredible that nobody in Dubai can call me on WhatsApp.
That's true, yes. Whereas in so many other countries, it's the de facto method of communication.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
My point is just that it looks right now like we are heading towards a place of isolation rather than unification.
Yes, I think that's true. Yeah. And isolated blocks, that are competing rather than communicating and aligning, which is a shame.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And to your point about would we be able to license the technology? I guess so, but there's a question about, do you want to be 100% dependent on someone else's technology?
Yeah.
Right? And kind of many of the lessons of the recent years have been, well, actually, we want a bit more control and self-determination, because it's not always good if somebody else holds that controlling switch.
Mehdi who I sat down with. He runs the International Data Center Association, and he's absolutely that compute is the and data infrastructure is the new sovereign currency.
Yeah,
that's his view.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It just you look at it the same way.
I think it's absolutely critical. Yes. And you need local computer infrastructure as well in country. I mean, it's interesting that Microsoft, I believe, cancelled a number of their planned investments in the US for data centers because with the changing political landscape, they realized they would need to create data centers in Europe to service the European market.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And now it's still Microsoft, but it's recognizing that they will probably have to have the physical data center in Europe to service the European market.
We've seen that with data, haven't we? The fact that your systems have to
exactly.
Customers' data need to be localized.
Yeah.
So it would make absolute sense.
Yeah.
There you go. There are signs that we're heading towards this kind of regional
blocks
approach.
Yeah.
It would probably be much easier or more achievable, to get there than to get everyone unified. Because the problem with the unification is that everyone has the same point, isn't it? That getting global alignment is going to come down to a serious event.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. That forces people then to sit up and align. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess when I think about that, the serious event for me comes from sentience or autonomous models getting access to stuff that they shouldn't.
Yep.
Or I guess it could be malign actors.
It could be, yes, malign actors causing very serious damage. I mean, we've already seen, impact on JLR, Marks and Spencer's, things like that, the health service when, malign actors get on. You imagine that on a much larger scale.
Yeah, someone locks out these things on a global.
Or taking down the electricity grid, for example, across the UK. That would be, horrendous in terms of its implications.
Yeah, I was talking about, I wasn't actually, and this seems really naive now, I hate to admit it, but I wasn't aware of how vulnerable we are to satellite communication and infrastructure as well. Yeah. I sat down with a young lady called Meki who works in the space for a space agency in the space industry, and her role is to track and map satellite activity, looking for rogue operators.
Oh, really?
So continue.
How interesting.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, amazing job.
Yeah.
So she literally tracks the movement of all of the satellites that are near Earth orbit, and her role is to identify any changes in movement, because that would then indicate potentially
someone's
hostility.
Hacked in or wow, that's incredible. Well, it's good there's somebody doing that, I guess.
But that's because of the vulnerability, just how much of our data systems and processes we're now dependent on via satellite. It's just quite incredible.
I had no idea.
Yes. Yeah. So coming back to that point, it does only there are vulnerabilities which maybe don't consider on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, absolutely.
Could be knocked out.
Absolutely. And agents, that's another one of the risks with AI agents, because the fact that they go out, collect information, work with tools, etc. That's an attack surface which is exposed to the outside world. If you have something that is only within your own computer or within your own company or something or other, it's much harder for a bad actor to break in. But the minute you have an agent that is going off and researching things on the internet and using some third-party software to do something or placing a transaction, all of those interactions with external systems provide potential vulnerabilities for somebody to hack in.
The guardrails and the compliance and the security that goes around these systems has to be a completely different level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a different level. We're going through that ourselves. Let's just talk about come back to this future piece. So I'm always really interested in people which are sat in the seats like you. You're talking to so many incredible people, stages around the world, which is brilliant. Well done. And I must say your book has I've not managed to complete your book. I've
That's
managed to get part way into it, but it's absolutely going to be read due to its relevance. Due to its relevance, but you've had unbelievable credit and for it, and which I find astonishing, by the way, for anyone to write a book and to go through a traditional publishing process, and for it to be relevant at the end of that period is a remarkable feat. And so, first of all, I'm just surprised that any of this stuff's not out of date by the time it gets there. What was the length from inception to publication?
So we were very conscious of this issue, right, because of the speed at which AI moves. And we did, I suppose, 3 things to address that. Right. One was the publisher managed to cut their publication time dramatically.
Brilliant.
So from when we submitted the first draft of the manuscript to it appearing on the shelves was only 6 months, which is usually at least double that for a traditional publisher. We wrote quickly. We wrote in our first draft was ready after about 8 months, which was quite fast. And then the other thing that we did was we deliberately tried to create a framework and an approach which would stand the test of time, even if bits of it need to change.
Yes.
So clearly things will need to evolve. And we stress in the book the fact that, your AI governance process will need to evolve. Laws change, things happen. But if you've got that fundamental foundation in place, then it actually becomes much easier to adapt to new technologies. I had a very good example of that, actually, when ChatGPT came out. So I was giving a talk at a law firm, and they had a whole bunch of their clients in, general counsel and senior lawyers and so on. One of the questions that was asked back then was, how are you dealing with this thing called ChatGPT? This was literally a couple of months after it had come out. Are people allowed to use it in the organization and so on? And you had a bunch of people who said, no, we've cut it off. CIO has blocked it. It can't access the system. Nobody's allowed to use it, etc. And then you had other people who said, well, no, we've come up with we've made changes to our AI policy and so on. And what was clear was the companies that had no existing AI governance controls, no AI policy, etc., were the ones that shut it off because they knew they had to create the whole thing from scratch.
Right.
The companies that already had some kind of data and AI governance in place, not for generative AI because it wasn't an issue 2 or 3 months earlier, but they had a scaffolding in place, they could then look at that and say, okay, well, we need to add this in here. We need to make a change to this. We need to do some training on this, etc. But it's much easier for them to change and adapt because they had something to build on.
Yeah, because I guess the risks are generally predictable in terms of the areas of
the areas of risks. Yes, exactly.
The areas of risk.
Exactly.
So putting that scaffolding around so that you can evolve it.
Yeah,
and having the right framework, and that's what we've been absolutely doing. And whether it's at the input and ingestion side, or whether it's around the cross contamination of data and use of memory and context. Yeah, there are certain vulnerabilities with AI systems which are not inherent in traditional.
Yeah, exactly.
Traditional systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, something may come along and change the landscape dramatically, but hopefully still the foundation will remain relevant.
Yeah. But that's nearly a year and a half you've gone through from inception to getting it on the shelf. And you've had literally a number of big tech leaders credit it, like some of the top echelons globally have come out and really said what a great piece of work it is. So well done.
Thank you. No, we've been very, very pleased and flattered, to be honest. Yeah.
No, it's great. It's really, really good. And from what I started with, I can't wait to get stuck into it. So let's just to wrap up before we go. All right. Tell me, what do you predict for 2026, the next 12 months, and the next 5 years? Where do you think we're sat? Give me some predictions.
So I think 2026 will be the year where organizations do start to use AI agents.
Right.
There's a lot of talk about agents in 25, but very few companies were really using agents. I think it's also fair to say that there's a definitional question around agents, and that a lot of people are rebranding what we used to call RPA, robotic process automation, simple automation of steps. It's being kind of rebranded by some people as agents. True agents have a lot more flexibility and scope. But I think we will see organizations actually starting to use those in 26. And so we as consumers will start to encounter them through our interactions with companies. And that will be very interesting to see, how that goes. To your point earlier about, is there some, catastrophe type thing? That will be interesting, because if some of the early uses, if something goes wrong in a big way for somebody, will that put off other companies from jumping in? Will that slow the adoption? But if it doesn't, if they've managed it well, and I think generally companies are cautious and they are putting in place a lot of controls and being very careful how they use this. So I think it'll probably go well. So I think in the next 12 months, AI agents definitely coming along. 5 years. 5 years is a long time in AI technology, by which I mean things are going to change a lot in 5 years. Dramatic things, self-driving cars, could they be all over the place? It's not impossible that they could be quite widespread, I think, in 5 years' time. We mentioned earlier, humanoid robots and so on. I think we'll start to see them around and about within 5 years. They, as you said, they're mixed at the moment. They're very good at doing some narrow things, and then you look at, there was that absolutely hilarious video of the Chinese Olympics, robotic Olympics, with them falling all over the place and what have you. Yeah. But there were a few really good ones in there that were actually extremely good. So I think in 5 years we will start to see robots popping up in different day-to-day kind of uses. I think we will be getting used to Agentic AI and having our AI assistant that actually does an awful lot for us and is making our life a lot easier.
I think that they'll have the ability to do a tremendous amount for us.
I think so. Yeah. Whether we'll have that holy grail of AGI in 5 years, who knows? And then again, there's a question of definition. What is AGI? Yeah.
And there's this argument on that point, isn't there, where, let's just say we're 0 to 100 in capability. 100 is PhD level of intelligence, right? But let's say that we're at 75 or 70 today. It's college, graduate, right? There are roughly 20,000 PhD graduates a year in the UK.
Okay.
Now, there is a whole lot more subjects that we need them to spend time on than 20,000 when it comes to individual interesting. And then loads of them get soaked up by tech companies and science and all the different genres, education, all around, right? The issue is that I don't think that you need PhD level intelligence if you've got 80% of that capability on scale. Daisy chaining, joining up.
Yep.
Because it's almost a bit like this argument with compute. What they've realized is that compute doesn't necessarily need to get any smarter. You just need more volume of it.
Yes, at the moment. Yes.
At the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. I've built multiple businesses which have scaled to be, award-winning, leading, growing, market-leading businesses and what they've done. Okay. Great. Wonderful. They've had very few PhD.
Yes, exactly.
Graduates in there. So you can achieve a tremendous amount without that level of intelligence.
You can, but I wonder if you would agree that actually the hardest parts often there are the implementation, the making it happen. Having the idea and the developing that product or service is only part of the solution, right? In building a successful business, there's a whole lot of other stuff. And I think that's going to be one of the critical questions for AI. We can have, let's say, this 80% PhD level AI widely available, but it's going to come down to how people use it and are able to then apply it
and leverage it.
And for that, they need to trust it. If people widely across society, the general public, people in their jobs are grabbing this stuff and they're using it and they're saying, yeah, I could do this and I can do this.
Yep.
Then you can see huge potential. But that takes quite a lot of reassurance and training and comfort with people to be able to do that.
Depends what sector though, doesn't it? So for example, right, let's take filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm convinced that we're going to see a Spotify equivalent. Maybe it is Spotify, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is outcompeting Netflix, right? Where we're going to see an abundance of filmmakers leverage all of this technology,
right, and creating new
and
content.
creating incredible television series and filmmakers. But I think it's going to empower them. Their adoption of that technology is going to mean that they're going to not need any of the infrastructure or previous experience of how to build a set, the whole previous production process.
True.
Is completely diminished.
It is, yeah.
So if you draw a parallel to that, I always look at what's working in one sector and just apply it. And that's the way I kind of look at it. I go, well, if it works there, it's going to work over here. If we can fold protein, it can fold my clothes. It can,
yes, yeah,
whatever it might be. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I go, AI is going to solve problems in easier ways and create accessibility of these tools.
Mm-hmm.
Your point, I totally agree. The smart part, the entrepreneurs that are going to win are the guys that work out how to make it that consumable.
Yeah, exactly.
And then how to leverage it.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah,
agreed. It's going to be a very exciting 5 years.
Yes. Yeah, I was sat down with Rich earlier, and Rich Mulholland, and he said, "Do you know what? Yeah, if you're my age, your age, our age, to have sat across the whole spectrum from very little digital, none, through to where we're heading.
Yes,
it's just going to be an absolutely incredible, an incredible part of the journey, really."
I agree. No, I think I'm very privileged to be around at this time and be part of it. Yeah.
As grateful as you are. And look, so thank you. Thank you for taking the time out.
Pleasure. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I kind of end up going in different directions, and I have this mind which kind of joins very practical views. I'm sorry it's not that academic.
That's what makes it fun, though.
Yes.
If it's just answering a bunch of standard questions, it's not very interesting for me. So this has been far more interesting and far more fun.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm going to be following the journey. And look, I'd love to sit down with you again in another 12 months. Maybe Rich said this earlier. What we should do is we're going to take a transcription, take all of the things we predict or expect, and then revisit them.
I think that would be very interesting.
In a year's time. So maybe you and I can do that.
Let's see how we do. Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking the time out. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.